Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your participation in our exploration of imagining green transportation. Major changes are not going to come without the full participation of all members of our society. Black and brown communities, differently abled, the elderly, children wanting a better way of moving from one place to another without polluting the planet. My name is Jay Walker, and I'll be chairing this webinar. I'm a community organizer at Pennsylvania environmental nonprofit Clean Air Council. In my personal time, I'm the president of the Allegheny County Transit Council. I'm also the vice chair of the Green Party of Allegheny County, a Green Party of Pennsylvania steering committee member, and a member of the Green Party of the United States National Committee. Lastly, I'm a member of the Pittsburgh's Public Transit, Bike Pittsburgh, and the Pittsburgh Democratic Socialists of America. Over a period of 3 months, our main speakers have gathered to plan this webinar, Reimagining Green Transportation. The panelists are going to speak about the difficulties of transit in both rural and urban communities, of the inequities built into the system that give priority to big business needs over people who want to include in their lives the ability to get to work, the ability to have rest and leisure, and the ability to enjoy one another and explore higher aspirations such as art, music, dance, theater, science, and invention. The panelists have come together to talk about preserving the planet so that all humans will thrive in a world without compromising the air we breathe and the water we drink. Now for our speakers. These speakers will have 10 minutes time limits. 2 bells will signify that the speaker has 5 minutes left. 4 tones will be heard when time is up. The speakers have unique experiences and each contributes to the knowledge of all of us. Participants will be muted during the presentations, yet the Q&A channel will be open. When you think of a question, please print it in the question and answer section by clicking on Q&A and typing your question using your keyboard. All right, our first speaker is Gwen Moore. Gwen is the curator of urban landscape and community identity at the Missouri Historical Society, focusing on race, ethnicity, race relations, and social justice issues in St. Louis. Gwen has been associated with the Society since 1998, working as a researcher, community programmer, and oral historian. Her current area of research focuses on urban renewal and its destructive impact on communities of color. That interest has led her to an in-depth study of Mill Creek, the largest African-American residential area in St. Louis that was demolished in 1959. Gwen has a BA in sociology and history from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and an MSW from Washington University. She worked for 20 years in the field of psychiatric social work before switching careers to pursue a doctorate in history.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jay, for that generous introduction. I am going to be talking about a community in St. Louis, Missouri called Mill Creek Valley, which was the largest African-American community in St. Louis that was destroyed by these twin policies of urban renewal and highway construction. I'm tempted to say the twin evils of urban renewal and highway construction. In 1950, according to the census, there were about 20,000 Black people living in Mill Creek Valley. It was really maybe more than that. It was at least 95% Black. It was on 454 acres, 79 to 100 blocks, 5,000 dwellings, 839 businesses. It was a truly walkable city. It was a city within a city. St. Louis was segregated, so Black people had to create their own institutions. Now, it was a thriving community. Of course, the urban renewal factions in the city said it was a slum, but it was not a slum. It was a Black community that was rich in culture and history. Some of the biggest Black institutions, the most important Black institutions, were located in Mill Creek Valley. There was a financial institution, one of the earliest in the city, built in 1923, People's Finance Corporation. In 1926, they erected an office building, the first commercial building built by Blacks in the city of St. Louis. 5 stories, contained the offices of doctors, lawyers, dentists, There were restaurants, there was a rooftop garden. Uh, the offices of the NAACP were there, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the Colored Movie Operators of St. Louis, which was a union. The Pacific Movement of the Eastern World was headquartered in St. Louis, started off in Chicago. So this was a really rich community. The two largest newspapers, Black newspapers in St. Louis, were located in Mill Creek. So this was not just a slum. This was a thriving, vibrant community. There were hospitals. There was a hospital there. There were hotels, 43 churches, 3 schools, a high school and 2 elementary schools, one time 3 elementary schools. So this was a community that was rich in culture, that was rich in history, that was rich in institutions. The only problem was it was an African-American community. And this African-American community was located on very valuable real estate, coveted real estate. It was buffeted by the downtown St. Louis, where the Central Business District was located. And on the other end was St. Louis University, 2 major entities, powerful entities within the city of St. Louis. And they could not expand, they could not grow as long as this Black community was there. So, 1950s, this was also the time when urban renewal was becoming popular. This was a time when the highway construction legislation was passed. And it was a way to get rid of this community. And as we know from the work of scholars like Deborah Archer, that this was purposeful, it was specific, and Black communities were targeted. The other thing about Mill Creek Valley, that it was so centrally located, it was such valuable real estate, that if you wanted to get from the suburbs to downtown St. Louis, where they had the major department stores, the major businesses, the major corporations, you would have to go through Mill Creek. You would have to go through this Black community. You would have to see Black people. So what happened was there was a drumbeat, a steady drumbeat to portray this community in some way as an eyesore. In fact, the newspaper called it the city's #1 eyesore. They would not even give it the distinction or the dignity or the respect of calling it a community or a neighborhood. It was the city's #1 eyesore, a slum. And this was a steady drumbeat by the 2 major white dailies, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. Nearly every day, and I looked at the newspapers, there were articles about this neighborhood, about this community, and how debased it was, and how it had to go. So out of this 454 acres, these 5,000 dwellings, the 839 businesses, these 43 churches, these hotels, these restaurants, these newspapers, they were all leveled to the ground. Only 4 buildings were left standing out of over 5,000 buildings. What happened was 103 of these 454 acres were allotted for the construction of a highway. It was called Highway 64. In fact, my family home is now part of Highway 64 because this highway went straight through this community. So, a walkable community, a thriving community, a community rich in history and culture was destroyed in the name of urban renewal and highway construction. And this has happened, as I said, not just in St. Louis, it happened all over the country. St. Louis is just one of the most egregious examples. At the time, it was the largest urban renewal project in the city and one of the largest in the country. We're talking about 20,000 people that were scattered and dispersed without any plan of how to relocate these people. So this community was destroyed. St. Louis University, I'm not ascribing any nefarious motives to St. Louis University, but it was able to expand, and it has benefited tremendously from the destruction of Mill Creek. There are no residences there now. There was a promise, because I was a child when it happened, that they were going to build houses and that these same Black people would be able to move back into Mill Creek. That didn't happen. There are no residences in Mill Creek anymore. And to make this erasure complete is that they even took away the name to erase it from memory. And as part of my mission at the Missouri Historical Society and for the city of St. Louis, to at least restore the memory of Mill Creek to the city, so these people are not totally forgotten. And I always say, people talk about Black Wall Street that was destroyed with bombs and mobs. The destruction of Mill Creek was just as complete, but they didn't do it with mobs. They didn't do it with bombs. They did it with a pen and paper and totally wiped out this community. So this is what urban renewal and highways have wrought, which is the total destruction of a community that has never been able to recover. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. Next up, we're going to have Jerome Bauer and John George Bauer Lewis. Jerome ran for public office 9 times in the last decade as a Green, most recently for St. Louis President of the Board of Aldermen in 2019, and Missouri Governor in 2020, and St. Louis Mayor as a write-in candidate this year, 2021. Jerome will discuss practical trolleys in urban transit, dangers of pedestrian spaces in urban cities. Jerome is looking forward to the day that when going for walks, not having to worry about getting hit by cars. Along with Jerome, we'll be having John George Bauer Lewis. John has been interested in trains since the age of 3. Consequently, he knows a great deal about them, including technical details and operations, although by no means does he know everything. He also knows a great amount about transportation in general, including walkability, accessibility, and this is due to his personal interest. He's also a member of the American Rail Club, and he has a bachelor's degree from Northern Illinois University in computer science with a minor in Spanish. He also has several certifications related to computer networking and security. Jerome and John will be in conversation. All right, here's the mic.
Hello, I'm Jerome Bauer. I am no transportation expert, but I love to walk without getting run over. I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, and there I bicycled everywhere. I bicycled to work. I bicycled, 20-mile bike trips just for recreation. And I also rode our Philadelphia trolley system everywhere. Philadelphia, unlike Chicago and St. Louis and so many other American cities, never paved over the trolley tracks. They retained the trolley system. They updated it, modernized it, and I found the trolley system very compatible with the bicycle system in Philadelphia. I had no trouble crossing the trolley tracks. You just have to be very careful and cross diagonally. I would very much love to ride the St. Louis trolley system everywhere, if only it was still running. Is our St. Louis trolley a practical trolley system? Well, not if it's no longer running. It isn't. So, a couple years ago, when we were this was just before my first political campaign running for St. Louis City Comptroller. We in the Gateway Green Alliance had a strategy meeting, and
Jerome, did we lose you? Jerome, you're still there?
Hello?
There, I think you're unmuted now. We can hear you.
Okay. I chose the transportation plan to update, and I added a line supporting practical trolleys. And by practical trolley, I did not mean just an heirloom trolley on tracks, an old-fashioned streetcar. I meant any transportation system intermediate between a bus and a light rail such as the Metrolink rail system here in St. Louis. That could include express buses running on dedicated lanes, and John George will show you some pictures of those and talk about them. It could include buses that can ride on trolley tracks. John George will show you some pictures of those too. But the important thing about, it's important that that we have a system that goes where you want it to go. Now, a couple years ago, I was invited to address the University City Council on tax increment financing because I had run the St. Louis City Treasurer on a platform that called for an indefinite ban on tax increment financing. So I chose the loop trolley as a case in point. The most common objection to the loop trolley is that it doesn't go anywhere. Well, it goes to shops that don't exist yet. And it goes to Washington University luxury dormitories that don't exist yet either. And we really don't want them to exist if, to build them, they have to tear down historic buildings. It also doesn't go where people want it to go. John George, can you show the map of the trolley system? If you look at the map, you'll see that that there's no trolley stop between the business district in the University City Loop and the Boulevard. The trolley is specially engineered so as not to stop anywhere in between those 2 points. It's sort of like the public transit equivalent of flyover country, and that's just not right. So anyway, is this a practical trolley system? I really don't think so. Now, our trolley ran from 2018, autumn 2018, for about a year. And then it went belly up because of very poor ridership and some logistical problems. An attempt to get by state development, the public-private partnership that runs the Metrolink and Metro bus system in St. Louis metropolitan area, including the Metro East in Illinois. By-state development didn't want anything to do with the trolley because it was set up in the first place so as not to connect seamlessly with Metrolink. And the St. Louis County Council didn't want it either. So right now it's an orphan. It's not running, and it's running up a big bill. And if we don't get it running again, we are going to have to pay back that money. So as one citizen put it, we're stuck with some brand new infrastructure and a really big bill. So what are we going to do about it? Well, on April 1, 2020, I created a Facebook event entitled Washington University in St. Louis Buys Loop Trolley, Offers Free Rides to the Homeless Shelters. To the homeless shelters that they're going to set up all along the trolley route. This trolley should be more than a gentrification program. It should be a practical trolley for real people. Well, I had my tongue in my cheek when I created that event. It was April Fool's Day after all, but it was a serious proposal under, color of jest, and it provoked a rather interesting reaction. So I know I have somebody's attention. A little bit before that, a friend of mine, business manager of a local loop restaurant, floated by me a proposal to get the trolley running again as a free service and close down Del Mar to automobile traffic and reestablish it as a greenway, plant some trees and put in bicycle paths and have walking paths and also space for street musicians, which would be good for business and just good fun. Well, I floated that proposal on the St. Louis Activist Hub, and this generated a very, very lively discussion, which is probably still going on. I should have mentioned that I'm almost blind now, so I can no longer ride my bicycle anywhere. I do very much look forward to running, to riding our trolley system when we get it running again, and to walking everywhere I want or need to go without fear of getting run over. Well, last summer, the trolley was actually run as a free service for 1 month on a trial basis. So we know that people are paying attention to what we're saying here, and I don't doubt that that we have a lot of people with money and power listening to this webinar right now. And we will be floating our proposal, Take Back the Trolley, on the Facebook page that my nephew John George set up, and also in the St. Louis Activist Hub. So let's crowdsource this and find a practical solution. So anyway, John George, if you could show the slide that you made with Google Earth. We're proposing that we keep one lane of traffic on Delmar, and we run the trolley as a free service, and we have bicycle paths, one going each way, so dedicated bike lanes. Also, bicycle parking lots and scooter parking lots, because one problem that I and many other people have is that people park their scooters right in the middle of the sidewalk, and I run into them. So parking lots for scooters and bicycles. Also, an Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA certified pedestrian overpass crossing over Skinker, because which is a really busy street, and I take my life in my hands every time I try to cross. So I very much look forward to riding our trolley, the people's trolley, down the middle of our street with bicyclists riding to the left and to the right of me, even though I will no longer be able to ride my bicycle. I also look forward to being able to walk anywhere in St. Louis that I need or want to go without fear of getting run over, all the way from U City Public Library to Forest Park. You can see that on the slide that John George is showing. And then from the Central West End all the way to St. Louis University on the greenway that the Gateway, that the Great Rivers Greenway people are setting up in the right-of-way of an old trolley system. So, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. So anyway, I'm no transportation expert, but I would say my nephew is. So I will hand this presentation over to John George, and he can show you some slides and talk about what he knows.
You're muted.
Yeah, if you're trying to speak right now, we can't hear you, John. I'm not sure. Could you say something?
Okay, you can. Okay, no, okay.
Now
Can
we
you
can
hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know why that wasn't working. Anyway, you're looking at right now. You're looking at a possible extension from the St. Louis History Museum to the Barnes Jewish Hospital Plaza, which is right by the Central West End Metrolink station. Because currently the fare system is not integrated at all with Metrolink, but that there is one interchange between that I was circling around with my cursor on the map earlier, between the Trolley and the Metrolink. There's possible other one that people could change here at, this is Forest Park here, is another spot, but that the main one was actually up hang on. Main one is up here at Delmar Loop, where with the old, I think it was Wabash station here. And that was another idea that we had, was making this into a excuse me, a small museum and waiting area, so that people for either line could wait out of the elements, especially in the winter. The other idea we had that I also had pulled up here is extending the line around Delmar down Trinity here, then down to this point here, and then curve around and end here, which is across from University City Big Bend Metrolink station, and also this high-tech copy center, which actually happened to print some of the flyers for this. So if anybody from St. Louis is viewing, that's where the flyers got printed. Switch so I can. This is a really good example of, this is in California, this slide, but this picture shows a double-track rail tunnel that's been converted to house a bike path in half of it, while still containing the trains. And this is used for the I'm just going to pop the link because it's not the Caltech. This is a really great example of something that I would like to see a lot more of. Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, running this type of Ontario diesel multiple units. Also, I'm going to show you something else that we talked about, which was that a bus, I can do this one. Sorry for the delay. That there's, anyway, back. That buses like, for example, this one, that this is a really good view that's showing that a bus that can run on a rail line, because this is particularly valuable for if you have situations where that you want to have being able to do like a bus route, but conventional bus route that accessing like a mall or something, but also having a dedicated private right-of-way. Now that's not the only way to do this, because and I'm going to drop a link to this later. I'm having to do it this way because there were some delays with other stuff, but that bus rapid transit like this, where you just have a dedicated bus lane, but you have these stations with high-level platforms like a train, and you can even use that for example, something like the St. Louis Metrolink, that you can share this, that you don't have to you have to build a road surface for that to work, but you can absolutely share and this is in fact a good incremental approach, is to building an improved rapid transit system, is you build a bus line with high-level platforms, and then you start adding trains to it as well. You do need to adjust the signaling to accommodate this, because trains frequently take longer to stop than buses do, at least in good weather. But this is something that you absolutely can do. Right now I'm just looking for photos, but just to give you some idea. Well, that's a Russian version, but that's the right there. That's in China. Can't remember. This is in Spain, but these are both versions of the same train here, the ICE 3 Intercity Express. That this one in Spain and this one in Russia. But you can absolutely that you can even build. This is from the this one is from the 1940s actually, but this is something that is really exciting, that you can actually have a train that is capable of fairly high speeds, 120 miles per hour, but that can go around streetcar curves, although you can't do both at once. That's not technically feasible. It would not be healthy to do that, and before you did that, you'd wind up derailed anyway. But that you can, the cars, this is our articulated train, but the sections are each only about 50 feet long to allow it to get around the sharp curves. And we used to have, this is the North Shore line, which ran by where I used to live actually, although that was long before I lived there. Ran from the Chicago Loop up through Evanston to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee was where it had street running. What was the other interesting thing, and this is still done to an extent in the UK with the London Underground, the Metropolitan line is a great example of this. Mainline trains, in this case, this interurban, running on the rapid transit system, and then continuing on their own right-of-way north, all the way to, in this case, Milwaukee. In the other case, in the Metropolitan line, I can't remember, it's like Aylesbury or something, which was also built by some of the same people. So it's not so surprising that the idea showed up there, that much of the London Underground actually was built by the same people who built the Chicago Elevated and the Chicago Interurban lines, with the same backers. Charles Tyson Yerkes is a particular name that was involved in both. And later with the Chicago Interurbans in particular, Samuel Insull. If you want to learn more about that. We can move on to the next person if you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Jerome and John. Your talks gave me two important thoughts. The first one is, Jerome, your experience, you raised a good point. You talked about your vision issues making it hard for you to ride a bicycle. And I'm sure that would also make it hard for you to drive a car as well. People often forget that transit is not just for people who can't afford cars. It's also for elderly people, people who have vision impairment. There are tons of reasons why people cannot drive a car. And it's not, and even if it was because they can't afford a car, cars are really expensive. that doesn't mean that they should get second-class treatment in our society. That's not a reason. Like, we shouldn't be treating low-income people as if they're not as good as people who make more money. And then the second thing, both speakers talked about the intersection of government and transit. Here in Pittsburgh, where people are shocked to learn that 25% of our city's residents don't own a car, according to census data. And that's because our city government governs as if only a tiny amount of residents ride transit. None of our council members take transit. None of them ride bikes. They all drive everywhere. But this November, that's going to change. Our local Green Party here in Pittsburgh is working to elect Connor Mulvaney to city council. He's a leader of a bicycle pedestrian advocacy organization here in Pittsburgh. He'd be the first person elected to council who actually takes the bus, like 25% of our city. And many cities have similar situations. Transit riding populations represented by council members who know absolutely nothing about transit. So maybe think about your own city. Maybe there's a local transit advocate that you should be electing to leadership to represent the parts of our society that are often left underrepresented. Okay, next up, we have David Henry, a longtime advocate for pedestrian rights, walkable communities, and climate change. David helped start a pedestrian advocacy organization called Walkable St. Louis 15 years ago. Walkable St. Louis launched walk to school programs and participated in the development of the St. Louis Bicycle Pedestrian Regional Plan. He gained a unique perspective on the plight of walkers when he walked over 1,000 miles in the summer of 2013 from Boston to Dayton, Ohio, and wrote a book about that experience titled David and the Giant Mailbox, Walking 1,000 Miles to Talk About Climate Change. Since 2019, David has lived and worked in Madison, Wisconsin. David's talk is titled Why We Must Have Walkable and Bikeable Communities and How We Can Create Them. All right, I'm passing the mic to you, David.
All right, thanks, Jay. And I just want to share my screen. I've got some slides here. All right, so I'm talking about walkable communities and how to create them. Now, I got to say, this is something that I've been talking about for nearly 20 years. And I've talked about the ways that the techniques that we can use to improve neighborhoods, make them more walkable. But I am upping the game a little bit this time, you might say. I think that we have a sense of urgency at this point that we need to be a little bit more radical in our approach about walkable communities. And so that's going to be the focus of my talk today, not just let's develop this neighborhood as walkable or this one, usually it's the upscale neighborhoods, but it really should be all neighborhoods. It should be the default. So I want to start with sort of where we are in history at this point. We obviously are in the middle of a global emergency, the COVID pandemic, and we've had to react fast during this pandemic. So once there was the lockdown, a lot of people wanted to get out and bike and walk in their neighborhoods. The problem was that the space for walking and biking was actually very restricted. So what you saw in many communities around the country is that there were efforts, right away doing things like taking parking lanes for diners at a restaurant, or taking lanes of traffic, or in some cases, closing streets altogether. These are things that did not take years of debate to do. This happened right away. We are in another sort of emergency, and I think that should be obvious to most of you on this call. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but we are at the point where we cannot continue to use energy the way we have, and transportation is a big part of that. If you look at this graph, we're right at that point, right at 2021, when we have to take that low emissions pathway right away, and that means drastic changes, part of which is reducing energy intensive transportation, using our feet and our bodies to get around more than engines. So I've got to back up a little bit and just define terms, what we mean by walkable. I think a pretty good one is is at the top here, and I have to move this out of the way a little bit. Just there we go. So a good definition of walkability is the extent to which the built environment is friendly to the presence of people living, shopping, visiting, enjoying, and spending time in an area. I think there's a really short, sweet way of saying it, though, that walkability means a place for people instead of cars. So again, continuing with this idea of where we are in history, if you haven't seen some of these restored historic photos of cities from pre-World War I really invite you to go out and look at these. These are amazing. This is one of New York. I'm not going to show you the film, but this is a still from it. What you'll notice in these films is that streets were for everyone at that time, prior to World War I. You watch these films and you see carriages, you'll see streetcars, you'll see horses, bicycles, and you'll see people crossing the street wherever, wandering down the middle of the street, not even too concerned about vehicles that may be coming upon them, chatting in the middle of the street and so on. The reason this was possible is because traffic was very slow. Once automobiles started to speed up, started to, as we got more and more automobiles, unfortunately, more and more pedestrians were killed. They then had to have a campaign to create this term jaywalker, which meant a fool, somebody who walks into the street when they shouldn't be. And then we got crosswalks and so on. But what happened was that we, over time, and as Gwen eloquently talked about the highways through cities, and Jerome and John George talked about the streetcars we used to have that were all taken over by the automobile. And we've come to the point where more than half the space of our cities has been given over to automobiles. That's not just the driving lanes, but it's the streets and roads, but it's also the parking and all of the infrastructure, the businesses that are specific to automobiles. They take up an enormous space in our cities. And taking that radical approach, what we have to do at this point is reclaim our cities for people instead of automobiles. If you go back to the street from pre-World War I, the term walkable would not have existed. Everywhere was walkable, essentially. But we've created unwalkable cities. And it's time to turn that on its head and make our cities completely walkable and think about where should they be drivable, which would be limited places. So as part of this sort of radical approach, instead of just looking at the sort of upscale neighborhoods and making them walkable, which has the associated gentrification problems and so on that force people out because of higher taxes and higher rents, we should have walkability as the rule, not the exception. That means when you look at the walk score of St. Louis, for example, the green is where it's more walkable. This should be green all the way through this city, and maybe just a few places of red where we need to get traffic through, and that's it. So driving would be the exception. So what do we do then? Of course, I have dad humor. It's almost a disease, but we should be taking steps, to do something about this. And that means the first thing that you can do, you don't have to have a committee or anything. Just get out and walk in your neighborhood. And when you do that, first of all, you'll be much more aware of where there are problems. There are problem crosswalks or problem intersections, maybe a lacking sidewalks and so on. But when you do that, I would maybe dress something closer to this, the fellow on the right here with the vest, because a lot of neighborhoods just aren't safe at this point. So be careful out there. So there's some other things that you may not do just as an individual, but there are some things that can be done with a group of people. One of my favorite is this one called Parking Day, where people will go out and they will literally take over parking spaces to create a, impromptu park, or put out chairs and play games or whatever it is. It may not seem too practical, but it actually has a certain, it raises a certain level of awareness. If people come by and say, "What are you doing?" Well, we're taking parking spaces. And you can say just how much of your city is being taken over by parking spaces. And it's really time we take some of that back. You get into a little bit more complicated projects, but still sort of on a neighborhood level, and there are things that you can do. Again, the reason that a place is not walkable is because of the speed of cars, the speed of traffic. And so there are a number of things that can be done for traffic calming. Planters that are placed in parking spaces, for example, on a street, will calm traffic, will slow traffic down. Obviously, speed bumps will do that. Some of the traffic circles that are put out there will do that. Also, things like raised walkways can help slow traffic. A big reason that we have just so many cars on the road is because of decisions that were made about zoning in the middle part of the last century. And that is where the idea of zoning was that you keep residential use separate from any business use. That means the businesses that were thriving, these neighborhoods that were thriving with businesses on the first floor and apartments on the upper floors, those were considered slums or whatever, and they were torn down. And now we're seeing that this is actually a much better way of developing. That's part of a walkable community, is to have residents and business all in close proximity in that way. Another thing that really has to be addressed is the absurd parking requirements that you will see that are required in many cities for a new development or whatever. Here's an example of a church that is a 6,000 square foot church, and the parking lot required for that church is 30,000 square feet. It's 5 times the size of the church itself. So this is absurd, and this needs to stop. So there was some mention in one of the videos about removing urban highways, and this is happening in a number of places around the country. The picture that I show here is actually in Portland, Oregon. They removed the Harbor Drive actually decades ago, and now there is a Riverside Park and walking, a much more pleasant way to get around. And, as we saw in that video, there were the idea of expanding roads and adding lanes does not reduce traffic. And what they're finding is this really improves the quality of life and actually improves business by doing these kinds of things. And I guess I don't have time for super blocks, but that's too bad. Please look up super blocks. That's an interesting solution as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that playbook of great solutions, David. Next up, we have shorter speakers. There's a lot to talk about with regards to green transportation. So we've asked several experts in their fields to talk for 2 minutes each. Our 2-minute speakers will not get a warning to stop, only the signal 4 tones, which signals time is up. We'll start with Richard Schaefer. Richard is a retired railroad conductor from Kansas City. He'll share his observations about rail. Richard, you're able to unmute? I think Richard's trying to unmute now. We still can't hear you. Still not muted. You're still muted. Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. A brief announcement. I don't know if you're all familiar with it or not, but pardon me. The American Solar Challenge. Is anyone familiar with that? That's the electric vehicles that are engineered by university students And every year they have an annual race. And this has gone on for about 2 decades now. And each new year brings new developments in solar-powered electric vehicles. It's all over the country, and its entrances are open to the world. So we've got people from all over the world. It is held in America, by the way, that arrive here with their vehicles to participate in the race. And the race is usually at least 6, 8, or 1,000 miles across the country, day after day. And the rules are that you cannot use AC DC to charge. You have to charge your batteries only by solar. So you can run your distance throughout the day. And it starts on the 3rd of August. It's right here in Independence, Missouri. It starts at the what's called 3 Trails. The square in Independence, that's where the Santa Fe Trail, Oregon Trail all launched from over 100 years ago. And on the 2nd will be the viewing. So for anyone that can make it, you can be here. You can look at the vehicles and talk with the young engineers that built them. And the race starts on the 3rd. But look it up on the internet, American Solar Challenge. It is interesting. They do need volunteers. You can volunteer for a number of different aspects of it. They'll pay lodging. It's usually corporations that will sponsor.
All right, Richard, that's your 2 minutes. Next up, I'm going to go to Elaine Enyard. Elaine is a retired physical education teacher from Kansas City. She's going to give us all a failing grade for physical activity. Elaine, are you able to mute? Okay, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elaine Enyard, and I am a retired physical educator. And I am supposed to be talking to you about the importance of movement, but I'm sure most of you know that. You probably have gotten it. I know you've gotten it from myriad venues. What you read, what you hear, what you hear from your primary care physician. So I know that you know that movement is important, and I will be talking a little bit more about walking and biking. I want to make sure that everybody knows that any kind of movement can be done, even if you are disabled. So if you are in a wheelchair, if you're on a walker, if you're on a cane, you can move. And that is important for our walkable and bikeable communities. I feel very fortunate that I live in a community that has stressed the walkability and bikeability of the city, of the urban areas. There are very many places that they can go, and it's the areas have been taken care of, they're well maintained. I heard David talk a little bit earlier about getting out and walking in your neighborhood. Well, and that's wonderful because that is a free activity that anybody can do. But you need to be really careful because some of the residential sidewalks, if there are sidewalks, have not been maintained. They're cracked, they're broken, they're uneven. And if you're not careful, if you're not looking, you can have an accident. So be careful about that. But for those of you that do not have a set exercise program, walking or biking is a great thing to do. Walking, of course, is free. And because of the oxygen, you'll have expanded lung capacity, your greater heart rate, and your muscle mass will be stronger, your coordination and your posture will be much, much better. And your focus for your mental health will be greater. And everybody needs to have better focus so they can have better reaction time. So the one thing that I do want to say is if you have not had a set exercise program and you want to get started with it, the first thing you need to do is decide what you want to do. If you want to walk or if you want to bike, and biking takes a little bit more money. And you need to have a vehicle that will be beneficial for you. So check with your primary care physician before you do anything. Then walking. Some people have this.
Sorry to cut you off, Elaine. Good advice. Next
okay.
up, we have Tony Saper. Tony is a retired bus driver from Kansas City. Tony will make comments about public transit as a public good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I live in North Kansas City, Missouri, and we're a place that has invested and is investing heavily in complete streets programs for people to walk, bike, separate lanes, and from the traffic lanes. We're investing heavily, and we're a city of about 4 square miles, and we're investing well over $30 million in those complete streets. But strangely, there's been a disconnect between that and public transit. We have on-demand service as well as regular through bus service. And our city council has recently discussed ways to change that on-demand service, to reduce its hours, to raise the price, which is now a quarter. And during our work sessions and council meetings, we've actually not considered that the impact this would have. We've not really considered the people that might be affected. And it hasn't been clear to them in the past that this is indeed a public good. Streets, roads, fire departments, street lights, it's just as essential for the people who use it. And the onus on us, we finally decided, is to continue and expand that service and further make it more publicly aware to increase the ridership. And that's a very positive thing for our city and for any city to do, to actually consider ways in which you can do outreach to increase the ridership of what is in fact a public good, as are the other services that I mentioned, water, electric, and so forth.
All right, thank you, Tony. Next up, we have Ramona. She's going to, Ramona's from Mississippi, Ramona Taylor Williams. She's the Executive Director of Montgomery Citizens United for Prosperity, MCUP. Ramona is a seasoned community and economic development practitioner, activist, and community organizer. She co-founded Metro St. Louis Coalition for Inclusion and Equity, MSLICE, in 2015. In 2015, she relocated to Jackson, Mississippi, and currently is project lead on Achieving Sustainability Through Education and Economic Development Solutions, A-SEEDS initiative. All right, I'm going to pass the mic to you, Ramona. Could you unmute? Ramona looks like she might be a little frozen right now. Not on. Maybe I should go to the next short speaker. Okay. We're just going to cut to the next brief speaker, and that's Howie Hawkins. Howie Hawkins has been the Green Party candidate for the 2020 presidential race. He's commenting tonight about Biden's infrastructure plan.
Yeah, that's called the American Jobs Plan. And it can't even meet its own transportation goals on its own terms, which are the wrong terms, not the kind of terms we're talking about. For example, he wants to build 500 electric vehicle charging stations, but to go to 100% electric vehicles will take 8 million public charging stations and 100 million home chargers. So he doesn't get close. His commitment to electrifying school buses, it'll take 50 years at the rate he wants to go to electrify 480,000 school buses. He says nothing about the 3.6 million heavy duty trucks, 98% of which run on dirty diesel. To get to 100% electric vehicles by 2050, you'd have to ban the sale of electric vehicles by 2035. He doesn't even want to put a date on it. And the whole plan perpetuates the kind of sprawl that requires the transportation system we have and relies on more extraction of lithium, cobalt, copper, and other minerals more than the planet can sustain. So now we got the bipartisan plan, which is just going to privatize as they rebuild the existing roads and bridges we got, which is perpetuating the system and costing us more. Now, Sanders and the Progressive Democrats want to increase the amount. They haven't specified what it is, but it's green Keynesianism. They're giving the money to the corporations who will make their decisions on their own based on profitability. Well, what we need is coordinated public planning and ownership to revamp the whole transportation system. I wrote 9,500 words taking apart Biden's climate plan, and I'll put the link to that article in the chat because I'm out of time. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Jerome again to talk about how difficult it is for people with disabilities to negotiate walking and just travel in general.
Okay, when I first got involved with the disability rights action movement, I was introduced to a Marvel superhero named Daredevil. He's totally blind, but all his other senses are superpowers, and he has a weaponized cane. Well, I can assure you, this is just a fantasy. My other senses have not become superpowers, but I have learned to rely on them more than I used to. For example, especially my sense of hearing when I'm trying to cross a busy intersection, I pay attention to the surge of traffic. That's what we're trained to do. It doesn't mean that I can ever feel I'm crossing a busy intersection safely. It's always a terrifying experience. But I've learned to ask for help, to wait until somebody else is willing to escort me across. That doesn't always work because there are not always pedestrians who are around. So I have to time my walks for times when I expect there'll be more street traffic. I have to say most people are more than willing to help. And so much of our mobility training consists in actually politely refusing inappropriate offers of help. For example, what to do if somebody grabs you and starts jerking you around and orders you to not rely on your cane. I got you now. The correct thing to say is better if I take your arm. So you have to be, quite firm about it sometimes because most people really want to help. As for the weaponized cane, that's really a fantasy because one thing that we're trained to do is never raise our cane in anger or it's sort of like in a hockey game, you get penalized for high sticking. Well, at any rate, there's something similar in the visual mobility world. We're absolutely not supposed to make any threatening gestures with a cane, and of course that's difficult to do because you have to move it around and tap wherever and to be effective. But you're inevitably going to tap somebody, and then you just have to be very polite and apologize. So it's really good manners.
Thanks for that experience. In Pittsburgh, we have a disability advocate who is raising hell constantly because our city turns a blind eye towards all ADA requirements. There's our city is a hell for people with disabilities, and our government does not enforce it at all. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, next up, we're going to try to go to Ramona again. Ramona, are you able to unmute? Okay, great.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I don't know what happened. My system just went down. There. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Ramona Taylor Williams, and I am currently living in Jackson, Mississippi. I just got off of a plane. It was delayed. It was crazy. So I'm very discombobulated right now. And I'm going to try and find my focus here. So please bear with me. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the lack of a public transportation system in rural communities in Mississippi. Coming from an urban environment and being very much an urbanite and have lived in urban centers all of my life, and just accustomed to having public transportation to get from one destination to the next, having sidewalks, even if those sidewalks were not the best, but at least there are sidewalks, to an environment where there are no sidewalks and where there is no public transportation. And in very rural areas, like a community that I am working in called Duck Hill, Mississippi, which is in Montgomery County, Mississippi, there's just nothing there. And this has a significant impact on the quality of life that the citizens of these rural communities that they experience. It also has a disparate impact on the public health of these communities. So when we look at it from a climate perspective, which is through the lens that I see this, rural communities, in particular the ones that I'm working in, these communities are 100% vehicular dependent. So that means that there is constant emissions going on, whether it is coming from school buses, whether it's coming from, vehicles, or whether it's coming from diesel, tractor trailers. It's just constant. So I'm concerned because I live here and I live in the city. I live in Jackson that does have a public transportation system, but it is totally, I don't even know how to describe it. But anyway, it needs a lot of improvement. Fortunately, the city is looking at how to improve the mass transit system, public transportation system here. And they did do a survey, and I think we're going to get some movement there. However, in the rural areas where the health disparities are just overwhelming. I mean, you just can't even imagine. And in particular in the Delta and in those counties that have large populations of African American and people of color. In Mississippi, it's still very much African American, Black and white. We don't have a large Hispanic population. So those disparities are there. I heard someone speaking about complete streets. And when we talk that kind of language, in these communities, they've not ever heard the word sustainability. We were fortunate to have been granted $300,000 by the Southeastern Sustainability Network in order to create a model, a sustainability model for small rural communities in Mississippi. And that model that we created is called Achieving Sustainability Through Education and Economic Development Solutions. And our primary focus was to mitigate severe flooding. Okay, I guess that's my time.
No, that was just a warning.
Okay. To mitigate severe flooding. And we had to do a lot of education because the community, the residents just had never heard of sustainability. They did not understand and did not know that the flooding that they were experiencing in their communities, that flooding was actually being impacted by climate change. So we went through 2 years of educating. We did mitigate the flooding. We used the dual gray and green infrastructure and designed a water diversion system so the town no longer floods. But we put a lot of focus around education, around sustainability, what the principles and practices are, and how we would be able to implement these principles and practices in other communities regionally, and then hopefully throughout the state. So transportation is, now that we have mitigated and solved the most pressing problem, stress, which was the flooding, now we are looking at other issues that have bubbled up in our listening sessions throughout these 2 years. And transportation is the number one. We are looking at the possibility of putting in a rails and trail, putting in a trail and a biking path trail. So there's all kinds of avenues that we're looking at. And I think this is an opportunity for us to look at green transportation because we don't have a transportation system. And so this would be an excellent opportunity for us to work, try, we've got, as you all know, Mississippi is Mississippi, very much a red state, very much a Trumpism state. And we're going to push, and that's all we can do. But we're going to push, and we're going to push very fiercely in order to, now that the infrastructure, hopefully that bill is going to pass, and there's going to be, and we're going to push very hard to make sure alternative transportation is a part of the Mississippi Department of Transportation's plan and their programming, so that we will be able to put these, move our communities towards mobility and move our communities toward reducing emissions so that we can have cleaner air and better air, and move some public policy, for around climate change and equitable climate change, climate policies. So that's kind of like where we are and what we are doing. I did want to do a PowerPoint, but my system is acting all crazy. I guess it missed me while I was gone for the last week. So, but anyway, I'm just really happy to have the opportunity to lift up the issues around transportation that rural communities are experiencing, and the challenges that we face moving public policy, which is really what is needed so desperately in the South as a whole. So when we are thinking in terms of strategy, please remember that those of us here who are living in the South and in rural communities, that we need to be a part of that discussion, and we need to be a part of those plans.
Thank you, Ramona. I think rural transit is often overlooked. Here in Pennsylvania, we just, a big transit coalition went to Harrisburg, our state capital, to advocate for statewide transportation funding, not just in Pittsburgh, but in Philadelphia, but also in rural communities across the state. Those rural transit systems are often invisible to not only many of the people who live in those areas, because it's only used by people who like desperately need them, but also invisible to the lawmakers there. They don't even think about the people who take those transportation systems. So thank you for raising that up. Okay, next up, we're gonna go to Dawn Fitz. And Dawn is gonna talk about why enrolling a child in charter school is not ecologically sound.
Is Frank gonna go before me, Frank Lawrence?
I was gonna go to you first, if that's okay, unless you wanna pass.
Yeah, I would like to, if Frank could go first and then I go after him, I would prefer that.
Okay, Frank, are you ready to go? Frank, you're muted right now. If you can unmute your mic. Frank? You're still muted. No, can't hear you still. Oh, you're unmuted now. Okay, now. You're right now. Getting a lot of feedback from your mic, Frank. Maybe let's go to Don first, and we'll talk in the chat, Frank.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think a lot of us are against charter schools already because charter schools are a way to break teachers' unions. They're a way to have elitism in schools and to have underserved communities have even worse education. But a big issue about charter schools is the fact that you have people driving all across an urban area as opposed to having neighborhood schools. So I think charter schools are just one of the ways that current changes in capitalist politics are making the environmental situation worse and not better. Now, another way that is in the offing I wanted to mention is airplanes. There's currently a push on to have airplanes that go from the East Coast to England at faster than sound. And of course, one of the things that they would do is to have 6 to 7 times as much use of fossil fuels as airplanes currently use. And I think it's important to realize that this is another way that transportation is, the capitalists are not just coming up with not doing things well, they're actually doing things a lot worse. Another thing that I want to mention, which is not transportation, but it fits into the overall theme, is Bitcoin. Not too many people know about this, but just a few months ago, Bitcoin went to a fossil fuel plant that was shut down because people did not need the energy. And they opened up the fossil fuel plant because Bitcoin uses enormous amounts of energy for its complex algorithms. And so here we have 3 examples of how capitalism is not doing things better or not doing things fast enough. Capitalism is actually going in the wrong direction and making things much, much worse in terms of fossil fuel usage.
Okay, thanks, Don. Frank, is your mic able to work? We'll give you one more shot. Can you unmute? Try speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Are you able to? Can you hear now? Yes. All right, I want to talk a little bit about, and basically I live in the Kansas City area, so we are the epitome of urban sprawl. We have concentric rings of freeways. We've destroyed a lot of neighborhoods in our town. And so I'm going to describe a little bit about the quandary that a person has in typical America, where I want to go to St. Louis is something that we do, fairly regularly. So my option is I could get into my car and drive on I-70 straight east to St. Louis, and I need to budget about 4 hours to do that. And an alternative that I've taken a number of times is I could catch a flight on a jet to St. Louis. In order to do
All right, having sound issues. Frank, are you able to speak? I think we should go on. Next up, we're going to go to Dennis Gailey. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. He's a retired auto worker, and he's going to describe the reality of our dominant car culture.
Okay, this is mostly from the Ecology of the Automobile by Peter Freund and George Martin. Auto travel promotes a subtle form of false consciousness about the relationship of the individual to society. As E.P. Thompson noted, driving fosters, quote, the illusion of self-motivated freedom, and, quote, disempowers people from confronting the determinism of the larger social process. So it kind of puts you to sleep. Fun fact, in the United States, people per car stands at 1.7 people per car. In the world, it's 12.0. We suffer from pollution in the automobile-dominated transportation system. Approximately 2/3 of the carbon monoxide, 1/2 of the nitrous oxide, and 2/3 of the carbon particulates emissions from human sources are created through traffic. Although there are louder noises such as jet takeoffs and landings, it is the case that highway traffic is the major contributor to noise in the United States as a whole. Stress, for example, the heart rate of a train passenger is lower than that of a passenger in a private auto. Some studies of automobile drivers have shown significant relationship between exposure to traffic congestion and a variety of adverse physiological reactions. In terms of death, we have on the NSC website in 2019, 38,800 deaths occurred from car crashes. And I think there's about 3,000 injuries. When it comes to public transportation, and we look for the sources, which are usually local, the sources of taxes for transit systems. In fact, since mass transit is financed principally from regressive taxes, such as sales taxes, the burden falls disproportionately on the poor. So we have an income effect, an unfairness involved, as well as the pollution, the accidents, the noise, and etc. So this is all on the car-dominated model.
All right. Finally, our last short speaker will be Howie Hawkins again, talking about what we're going to need to do to achieve healthy communities.
Well, I'd like to start with an observation from Ivan Illich in a provocative little book in 1974 called Energy and Equity. He observed that as society industrialized and went to mechanized forms of transportation, as soon as they exceeded about 15 miles per hour, the speed of a bicycle, a number of adverse effects happened. Access to transportation became radically unequal. Poor and working class people had a harder time getting around crappy mass transit, while the affluent had their cars. But ironically, the affluent spent more time traveling than they did before. Traffic jams, longer distances as sprawl spread out. And as was pointed out, roads and parking took over city space, half the damn cities. People move faster, but they spent more time traveling. And in terms of energy, we spent a lot more energy moving around fossil fuels than we did when we walked and biked around walkable communities. So the conclusion is we need to rebuild our cities around walking and biking for equity, convenience, and energy efficiency. Now that requires, we need convenient mass transit for the longer commutes. We need to move from freight transportation to electrified rails for moving freight from place to place, with the last leg being electric vehicles to get it to factory stores and homes. But these things will not happen unless we socialize the transportation sector, the car companies, the railroads, and all the parts suppliers, so we can coordinate the production and also redesign our communities so that transit, new housing is built so that they're walkable communities. The UAW had a group called still has a group called the Auto Workers Caravan. In the Great Recession, we took over Chrysler and GM. We should have used them to build solar, wind, mass transit, electrified vehicles. And they went to Washington, and Washington ignored them. They're still around fighting for these things. To me, that's why we need the Green Party, because the Democrats, they're bought lock, stock, and barrel like the Republicans by the oil industrial complex. We need economic democracy to get these things done.
All right, that's the end of the Q&A section. Thank you to all of our speakers. Sorry, that's the end of our short speaker section. Next up, we have the question and answer section. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions to the speakers. And while questions are being written, we will listen to Frank Lawrence's song, Imagine a Green Community.
Imagine a green community. Imagine walking or cycling, pushing the foot to the pedal, getting a healthy heart, might get a sports medal. Imagine all the people breathing for today. When you say I'm just a dreamer, and I know I'm just one, but when this world awakes, the dreams will be done. Imagine all the blind walking down the streets, living with no fear that a car will come near. Imagine all the people breathing for today. You may say I'm a dreamer, and I know we're more than one. But when this world awakes greener, we can breathe as one. Imagine not sitting in a car for 4 hours, where the sun mixes gases and toxins enough to kill all the flowers. Imagine all the people breathing for today. You may say I'm a dreamer, and I know we're more than one. And when this world awakes greener, we can breathe as one. Imagine looking at the sky. No contrails would we see. Millions of birds will not die. Carbon and emission free. Imagine all the people breathing for today. You may say I'm a dreamer, and we know we're more than one. But when this world awakes greener, we can breathe as one. Imagine a trolley or train. No cost eliminates the pain. The transit where you need to go. Expanded rail gives us gain. Imagine all the people breathing for today. You may say I'm a dreamer, and I know we're more than one. But when this world awakes greener, we can breathe as one.
Okay, thank you for that, Frank. So we have some questions. I'm going to start off with a quick one. This one's for Gwen. What are the boundaries of Mill Creek Valley? Gwen, if you can unmute, you're muted right now.
If you're familiar with St. Louis at all, it was bordered on the east by 20th Street, which is Union Station, which was a large train station. On the west by St. Louis University, Grand Boulevard to 20th Street. Then on the north by Olive Boulevard, and then it ran from Olive Boulevard to the south to railroad tracks, which is present day Scott Avenue. If you live in St. Louis, you probably know what those streets are. Yeah. But those were the boundaries.
Okay, next up, we're going to go to a question for David. What is the macro part of a transportation plan that has walkable neighborhoods?
Well, so transit would play a role. I don't think transit is necessarily a silver bullet. They have to kind of work together. Any transit rider is a pedestrian at a certain part of the trip. So we have to have walkable neighborhoods and transit for those longer trips. I know that in Madison, where I am, there's talk of bus rapid transit, and I think that's an interesting sort of medium solution. You don't need the heavy subway or light rail necessarily. So bus rapid transit is an interesting solution for that. Oops.
Yeah. All right, next up, we have a question for Elaine. Being sedentary is a main cause of ill health, even compared to obesity or smoking. Are people exaggerating this?
No, of course, I've worked mostly with students, but I see younger and younger students coming in with diabetes, 6th and 7th grade, and it's environmental as well as genetic. So no, I don't think it's exaggerated at all.
Okay, great. I have a question for Richard. Richard, you're a former transit operator. Can you speak to what the unionizing situation is of transit operators where you're at? I know here we have ATU. What about where you operated? And Richard, you're muted right now, just so you know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the rail unions for freight and Amtrak is the UTU. It's been the UTU for decades, and it's a fairly amicable union. It's pretty well organized, and the benefits are really great as well.
Right. I know we always talk about how important the union jobs are in transportation, and a lot of transit solutions are attempting to like cut union work out of union labor out of transportation, try to like cut corners. But I mean, when your life is in the hands of a bus operator, you want them to be well trained and to be steady, you know, like a veteran, not somebody who's just coming in and leaving. All right, the next question I have is for Howie. On the campaign trail last year and in 2019, how did you travel around the country? What kind of transportation did you use?
Mostly I drove myself. Sometimes I had to fly. And in the second half of the campaign, I Zoomed. And I talked to a lot more people. I mean, I was spending half every day before the lockdown, driving halfway across the state or flying halfway across the country. So, you know, this is a good way to campaign. and I preferred it because I got a lot more done.
Yeah, one other transportation solution people don't think about is teleworking. I mean, commuting is like such a big part of our transportation needs. And now when people are able to do some of the work that we do from home, that really reduces the transportation burden, at least on our, like, not only our rail, our bus lines, but also our highways. And that's causing a lot of cities and other areas to completely rethink what their transportation schedule should look like.
We also have to keep in mind that half the workers have to be present, whether they're service workers or people that work with their hands. And so not everybody can telecommute. That's why we need a walkable community so you can walk to work, or at least bike to work as much as possible.
All right, I have a question for all of the speakers, and I'm going to run through them one by one. This question is, we're talking about a lot of a vision of what a transport, like a communities with strong transportation that are walkable, that are healthy communities, what that might look like. My question for each of the speakers, and I'm going to go through you one by one, is what is one thing that needs to change to make that happen? Okay, Elaine, I'm going to start with you, and Don, you're going to be next. So just heads up.
Okay, what is one thing that could make my community more walkable? Is that the question?
Yeah, just to kind of like bring about this vision of a community with better transportation options that are better for the environment and also for our health.
Well, you know, strangely enough, I think my community could probably compare with Ramona's community about the rural transportation system, because there are some areas in Kansas City that are really not accessible other than by a vehicle. So more light rail and more smaller vehicles, perhaps rapid bus transport, and more, I guess, more electrical vehicles that wouldn't be as have such high emission levels.
Okay, Don, what's your one thing? Don, you're muted, just so you know.
Okay, well, the thing which is most important, I think, is to make urban areas where people subdivide urban areas into subunits of like 5,000 to 10,000 people, so that people are expected, you know, you have a sub-city within a city, and you can do things like go shopping, you can do things like go to the movies, you can have post offices, everything that you need within a walkable area. And once you have that, then you can do things like get rid of parking spaces. And you put those two together and you have one really powerful idea. You get to where you need to go by walking or bicycling, and you don't have any place to park a car.
All right, Dennis, you're up.
I'd say, although this is very general, I would say we need something like guaranteed transportation. I would like to have everybody have a right, a basic right to get back and forth to work. I would like to bring that to our consciousness, because all of our transportation problems are basically social problems. And transportation, you know, the automobile, the horrors of the automobile are just the locus, just the location of the class problem, of colonialism, racism, and patriarchy.
Okay, John George. John, you're muted. And if everyone could just keep their response really brief, we have a lot of people, let's just run through them just so that we have like a mix of answers.
I end up having to have two buttons to unmute. For me, I live in Woodstock, Illinois, so a bit different, fairly walkable, but I would say there are some places where lowering the speed limits and otherwise doing more traffic calming is, I think, the key thing, where it's difficult to cross certain streets. And there are a few places where sidewalks aren't present where it needs to be added, but overall, Woodstock is very walkable.
All right, Howie, you're next. And everyone, reminder, keep it brief, really brief.
I think we got to take away from the private real estate industry and developers community planning. They're the ones that planned these highways that destroyed Black communities. Same thing happened in Syracuse and St. Louis. Black communities between downtown and universities. They ran a highway through it. They segregate us. They make profits off segregation. And then you get the environmental racism where they put the pollution in the communities that are least able to defend themselves. We got to take that away from them and have democratic community-based planning, and then we can build walkable, bikeable communities.
Tony?
I happen to live in a 5,000 person sub-city that's directly across the river from Kansas City, Missouri's downtown. And that speaks to the fact that we need regional solutions.
Okay, great. Gwen?
Well, I'm going to say amen to Howie. I happen to live in an African-American community in the north side of St. Louis. That's been total disinvestment. When I talked about Mill Creek, I talked about everything that was there, the restaurants, the movie theaters, the schools, the churches. I talked about all these things. There were things to walk to. In my community, there is nothing to walk to. So it's not walkable. Even if you, where are you going to walk? Because it's been total disinvestment in this community. And I agree with Howie. These developers have ruined the African-American community. And I know you wanted to be brief, but this is a difficult subject. And I want to hit the real estate industry too, because they have been a part of the bad guys and really upending the African-American community and segregating the community as well. It's not just government policy, it's government-private partnership that segregated these communities and really ruined Black communities.
David?
Yeah, I want to also repeat Gwen and Howie. I like both of what they said. And I think it's got to be organic. It's got to come from the local neighborhoods. But what we really need to do is totally change our infrastructure from dominance to cars to dominance of walking and biking.
Richard?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Every city has a chamber of commerce. The Chamber of Commerce in every city of America is the go-to for corporations and development companies to suck money out of our treasury. And it's happening in a rapid manner. In Kansas City, for example, these corporations are sucking over $100 million a year out of our coffers, out of the people's treasury of Kansas City. We have to get rid of these development companies, corporations, and throw them out of our city governments. I was speaking with one of the city council members on the radio just a couple weeks ago, and he agrees. And the mayor talks about it. We have a good mayor here. And he can't get anything done because the corporations have a lock on the treasury of the city. If you want a bicycle ride down Kansas City, you're likely to be thrown off into a gutter because the roads are so bad. I've never seen the roads this bad in 50 years.
We have a lot of speakers. Let's go to Ramona next.
Okay, let me see. What would I say? What would I do? I think, first of all, kudos to Howie and Gwen. Just so on point. And again, that's a big subject to tackle in a couple of words. But one of the things that I think that I would do is, I think we should begin to glamorize walking, movement, and make it more attractive. You have to kind of understand also, vehicles are also a social status thing, especially in the Black community. So there's going to have to be a lot of educating. And I don't know if we're going to even get folks to stop buying vehicles and stop wanting cars. But one thing we can do is we can glamorize the alternative. And I think that's the direction that I would definitely want to go, especially in rural communities.
Frank, how are your mic issues? Are you able to unmute? You're unmuted, Frank. Oh, you just muted yourself again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, hello. Boy. Anyway, I was talking about, I was going to tell a story about our existence here, probably typical American existence. I live in the Kansas City area, which is a big old sprawling Midwest town, very, very wasteful of space, concentric circles of freeways that run around the Kansas City area. And we've destroyed a lot of neighborhoods in Kansas City. But so one of my common trips is that I would go to St. Louis, you know. So my option is I could get on the freeway and drive down I-70, which is about a 4-hour drive. Not too bad, but still quite a bit of work. And the other option that I have is I could take a plane ride and go to St. Louis. And so in order to do that, I have to drive from the southeastern corner of the metropolitan area up to the northwestern corner. It takes a full hour to make that drive up to the airport. And and then I have to park my car, buy some parking, and I take a little bus thing that carries my luggage and stuff over to the airport. And it takes me about an hour to get checked into the plane, go through security and everything. And the plane ride itself is about an hour long plane ride. Basically, the plane goes up, and about the time that it gets up to a cruising distance, it levels off and it starts to drop for landing in St. Louis. And so it takes probably a good hour at least to fly to St. Louis, just the flying part. And then you have to disembark from the plane, and you have to get all your luggage and everything again, and get onto the next type of transportation that you find in St. Louis, which could be either the Metrolink or a rental car or something like that. But it takes me as long flight to St. Louis as it does to drive, and in some respects more work. So flying has the potential of being very wasteful of energy as well as time. And are you able to hear this? Does that sound all right?
Yeah, thanks for that, Frank. Okay, I guess we will conclude the question and answer. Thanks to all the speakers. I'm going to pass the mic along to Chris to give some announcements.
Hi, everybody. We just have a couple of announcements. Anyone who's watching the forum, thank you for coming. And if you have any announcements, please type them in the chat and we'll be glad to read them off. The first announcement, as Ramona said, to glamorize walking and biking, the Rock Island Trail linking Kansas City and St. Louis in Missouri has now opened. There's an opening ceremony Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, and it's I'm not quite sure where it is, but if we look in the paper, I think we'll find it. It's at 10 o'clock right outside the stadium. So that's much, as everybody knows, it's kind of hard to bike all the way across Missouri from St. Louis, and then you end up on Highway 50, which is full of traffic and noise and no place for bikers. Next up, we have our next Missouri Green Party webinar, which Don will talk about.
Okay, the next webinar is Wednesday, August the 4th. It will be on the conflict between the conflict in Palestine, Israel, the attacks that Israel has made on Palestine. We're going to have some international speakers who are really well known. We're going to have a Palestinian who will call in from Palestine, even though it'll be 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'll be talking about what it's like to live under the attacks. We're also going to have an Israeli who has flown flying missions against Palestine until he realized what he was doing was horrible. And then he was one of 27 co-signers of a letter to the Israeli military that he would refuse to participate in any other attacks in Palestine. We will have Zaki Baroudi with the Universal African Peoples Organization talking about how Palestine, Israel is an example of colonialism that exists in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and throughout the world. And our moderator will be Madeline Hoffman. And Madeline Hoffman is the head of the Green Party Peace Action Committee. So we'll be sending out announcements about that. I hope everybody can tune in, can register for that and tune in on Wednesday, August the 4th.
The next announcement is that Iceland has voted for and it's put into effect a shorter work week with no cut in pay, which is one of the things I would have said what we need to do to change in this country to make transportation better. You need more time to walk and bike places. So they did a long running trial of a shorter working week, and it has been hailed as an overwhelming success as the vast majority of the country's workers have secured contracts to shorten their hours with no cut in pay. Next, another very key world event, the Guardian newspaper reported that Tegucigalpa, a high court found Castillo, former head of a dam company, and the short acronym for that is DESA. He was found guilty of collaborating in Berta Cáceres's murder. Now, Berta was an environmentalist who was 44 years old. She was co-founder and coordinator of the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. And this group was dedicated to the defense of the environment and the protection of the Lenca natives. She received the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize for leading a grassroots campaign and successfully pressured the world's largest dam builder to pull out. So that's that. And petitioning for ballot access in the Missouri area, the Missouri Green Party members and all supporters who believe in participatory and democratic governance will want to pay attention to petitioners who are out on the streets right now getting the required signatures we have to get, which is 10,000 to achieve ballot status. And ballot status means the right to run in statewide Missouri elections. If you would like to help with that, please contact Nathan Klein, and I will put it in the chat. Okay, and now I'd like to turn it over to Bob from the Climate Council, who did all our technical work. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for hosting this event. If you're interested in more information on the Climate Council, you should see our website on the page. Go to climategkc.org. And thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, I'd like to thank Jay from Pittsburgh for being our chair. Jay, do you have any final words? And all the speakers and all the participants.
No, I don't have anything more to add. Thank you to all the panelists and to all of the attendees And to everyone, all of the supporters behind the scenes that you didn't get to hear from, but that were crucial to making this event happen.
Good night, everyone.